The squad consisted of 6 operators who arrived at a classified military base shortly before dawn. A sniper lieutenant with extensive experience took on the leadership role. He had served in multiple hotspots and knew how to operate under heavy enemy fire. Designated as the lead sniper, he was tasked with planning and coordinating the operation. Next to him was a young sniper, recently out of training. Despite being a talented marksman, he had little real combat experience and was eager to prove his reliability, anticipating the moment they would take off. Communications and navigation were handled by the radio man and guide, who knew the operational area better than the locals. His job was to maintain communication channels and keep in touch with command. The 4th member was the machine gunner, whose job was to provide heavy suppressive fire if needed and prevent the enemy from getting too close. Rounding out the unit were 2 demolition specialists, known for their ability to create distractions and use mini-drones equipped with explosives capable of varying destructive power depending on the selected mode. These devices housed a small yet highly effective charge, an innovation developed by government engineers and actively employed in combat operations. All 6 were expected to function as a single synchronized mechanism. The command center had a clear objective: eliminate the leadership of a drug cartel that was planning to meet with influential mafia bosses. In a remote mountain forest region of Mexico, located several miles from the nearest town, lay a farm and a facility for producing illegal substances. According to intelligence, the cartel's leader had summoned a meeting there to discuss the next stage of smuggling into the United States. The special unit's mission was to carry out a precise strike, taking out both the cartel boss and the visiting criminal leaders during their negotiations. The plan involved 3 steps. First, they needed to complete the sniping phase quietly, without drawing attention. The syndicate heads were expected to arrive around midday. The snipers had chosen a position roughly 1.5 miles from the farm. Meanwhile, the demolition specialists intended to prep their drones. If all went well, accurate gunfire would eliminate the criminal heads, leaving their subordinates leaderless. The second phase was the sabotage operation. The demolition specialists planned to launch several mini-drones armed with innovative charges. Despite their compact size, the explosives inside each drone could cause either localized or more extensive detonations. This cutting-edge design allowed for adjusting blast power to fit mission requirements. The explosions were meant to happen simultaneously, crippling the cartel's operations, destroying production capabilities, and demoralizing any remaining fighters. The primary goal was to inflict irreparable damage to the cartel's entire structure and halt the manufacturing of illegal substances. The third step was evacuation. The unit intended to retreat to a designated point on the map, located 5 miles away from the objective, where a helicopter would be waiting. The machine gunner would provide cover if any surviving gunmen decided to pursue them. Given the rugged forest terrain and potential ambushes, the team would have to withdraw quickly and with caution. The mountains were home not only to the cartel's men, but also to local bandits whose allegiance was unpredictable. The command warned that they could only rely on their own strength. Final instructions reached the unit before takeoff. The lieutenant reminded everyone of the importance of precise action. Each operator understood that any delay or carelessness could lead to failure. The young sniper kept glancing at the helicopter, doing his best to stay calm. The demolition experts finalized the drone settings, double-checking the explosive force regulators. The radio man secured an antenna to his backpack, and in a deliberately hushed tone warned that once they landed, communication would become unstable. Mountains in Mexico presented a serious barrier to radio waves, so they would have to keep transmissions short and conserve battery power. Off to the side, the machine gunner was sorting ammunition, estimating how many rounds would be necessary if they had to fight their way out of the area. It was time to board. The helicopter was ready to lift off. Everyone took their seats and strapped in. A tense silence filled the interior. No one harbored illusions about the difficulty of the assignment. The military officers overseeing the operation reported unusual activity within cartel territory, but no one delved into the details. The primary goal remained the same: eliminate the cartel's criminal leadership. As the helicopter blades began spinning, the group did a final gear check. A few minutes later, they rose into the sky. The lead sniper signaled, and the mission began. Everyone understood there was no turning back. They were dropped off on the outskirts of an old airfield, overgrown with tall grass that concealed parts of a ruined runway. The military helicopter that brought them quickly took off again, not waiting around, to avoid drawing attention to a place that had once served as a landing spot for contraband shipments. The team surveyed the surroundings and spotted a dilapidated control tower, run-down hangars, and scattered debris from the cartel's past activities. The area was so remote that any engine noise was unlikely to reach curious, unintended listeners. The radio man led them to a small airplane that looked far from reliable. This single-engine craft was equipped with a modified propeller muffler, so the cartel wouldn't detect uninvited guests landing on an improvised runway. The pilot, linked to U.S. intelligence, merely nodded, indicating where they should store their gear. The demolition specialists loaded in the drone cases. The machine gunner sat near the exit, ready to disembark quickly if anything went wrong. The lieutenant and the young sniper sat side by side, rifles at hand. Loading took only a couple of minutes. The plane made no loud signals, its engine only emitting a low hum that was lost amid the rustling of the surrounding forest. It began to taxi, gradually picking up speed across the uneven surface. The group knew that any mistake could compromise the mission before they even neared the base. Soon the small aircraft lifted off, heading deeper into the mountainous forest terrain. The flight lasted no more than half an hour before the pilot found a sufficiently level patch of ground about 6 miles from the target. He landed expertly on a narrow clearing flanked by tall trees. The team quickly disembarked, gathered their gear, and disappeared into the woods. The pilot took off again, leaving the special unit on their own with no aerial support. The trek on foot started with pushing through dense foliage. Overgrown trails were choked with brush, and only the radio man, guided by GPS, could indicate the correct direction. The lieutenant walked beside him, keeping vigilance at its highest. The others followed close behind, eyes sweeping the surroundings. The machine gunner kept his weapon at the ready, occasionally pausing to listen for distant sounds, of which there were plenty in that thick forest. They trudged on for a while, crossing ravines and seeking flatter ground to conserve their strength. The air was heavy, laden with humidity and the scent of vegetation. No one complained about fatigue. Suddenly, the lead sniper raised his fist, signaling them to halt. Everyone dropped to the ground. Voices echoed ahead. At first they sounded like the usual cartel patrol, but the words were frantic and halting. The radio man pointed to the men darting between the tree trunks. They did not move in a coordinated formation. It looked more like they were running aimlessly. One of them kept glancing over his shoulder, as though something was chasing him. Another shouted in panic, lacking a radio or any other communication device. Their behavior was disorganized, as if they were fleeing a terrifying threat. The lieutenant motioned for the group to prepare for contact. The demolition experts set down their gear, keeping personal weapons at the ready. The young sniper took position among the tree trunks, trying to gauge the situation. Then one of the cartel men began firing wildly into the brush. His bullets went harmlessly into the air, not hitting the special unit. The behavior seemed senseless, and his screams indicated he was not in control. The lead sniper calmly squeezed the trigger, sending several shots that took down 3 of the fighters in front. At the lieutenant's instruction, the young sniper also fired, but his hand shook at the last second, merely wounding his target. The wounded man fell into the dirt, screaming in pain. Silence settled over the area. The remaining fighters, realizing there was gunfire, fled in a blind panic, completely abandoning any hint of organized resistance. Some disappeared into the vegetation. Others collapsed under a hail of bullets. It seemed fear had gripped them well before they encountered the special unit. The lieutenant pointed at the man writhing on the ground a few yards away. He ordered the young sniper to finish him off, ensuring there were no witnesses and sparing him further suffering. The young sniper approached and saw the man gasping for air, coughing up blood, and muttering something indistinct. He kept whispering a single word: "Beast." The sniper froze for a moment, seeing the terror in the man's eyes. But the lieutenant's order was not up for debate. A shot ended the cartel fighter's life. The lead sniper told the group to search the bodies. The radio man quietly noted there were no radios on them. The machine gunner remarked that this kind of behavior was unusual for cartel patrols, which typically moved in organized groups and rarely showed panic, especially since they often traveled by vehicle. The lieutenant nodded, agreeing. He decided they shouldn't linger. There was no base here, no defensive line. They had to press on and reach the meeting site before the cartel bosses arrived. Gathering their equipment, the special unit continued deeper into the forest, heading toward the designated vantage point for sniper fire on the base. The word beast kept gnawing at the young sniper. He agonized over what could have frightened those men so badly that they fled without looking back and fired at empty bushes. The others refrained from discussing it out loud. They had a mission to complete, and idle chatter could only diminish their alertness. After some time trudging through overgrown paths, the squad reached a rocky precipice that offered a partial view of the valley. Somewhere ahead lay the cartel's base of operations. The radio man checked his watch, remarking that the criminal bosses might arrive later than planned if something truly unexpected had happened in the forest. The lieutenant said that their mission remained unchanged. They would follow the plan drawn up by command. The demolition specialists confirmed that they would keep the drones close at hand, ready to deploy explosives on the cartel's infrastructure if an opportunity arose. The team made a short stop at the foot of the cliffs to study the terrain and confirm their coordinates. The radio man carefully checked his GPS, comparing the map with landmarks, and noted they were no more than a mile from the base. Ahead was a narrow trail that disappeared into thick foliage. The machine gunner inspected his ammo, warning that should they face a large number of enemies, managing their fire accurately would be crucial. The lieutenant explained that their recon phase was to take a look at the base from an elevated position to determine the best time to eliminate the mafia leaders. The group pressed on, moving carefully and using the natural cover of rocks and dense shrubs. The air was damp, a light haze drifting between the tree trunks, reducing visibility. The radio man in the lead raised his hand to halt them again. He pointed to a gap in the trees, revealing a section of land where, according to command, the cartel's main compound was located. The special unit took up position on a small rise, observing the base through binoculars. The sight before them defied expectations. There was no sign of active operations. Several overturned cars lay scattered in the yard, as if they had been violently tossed around. Off to one side, they could make out dark shapes that looked like bodies. The machine gunner whispered that he saw no one moving. The lead sniper adjusted his scope and confirmed the absence of any patrols. It was strange, given that the cartel would normally guard such a critical location. The demolition specialists crouched behind some rocks, trying to determine whether this might be an elaborate trap. The radio man sent a brief message to command. No sign of an armed patrol at the base. Signs of destruction and dead cartel members are visible. The response came back fast and terse. Find out what happened, and complete the elimination of the bosses if they're still there. The lieutenant signaled for them to move down to the base. Everyone knew the calm could be misleading. The group descended in single file, hoping not to become easy targets if someone lay hidden in ambush. They quickly reached the lower edge of the slopes and approached the base's perimeter. No one came out to meet them. Not a single shot was fired. The silence was more oppressive than open combat. Gusts of wind blew scraps of paper and garbage across the ground. To their left lay the overturned shell of a truck, its cab crushed and windows shattered. It appeared the driver had tried to find refuge inside but had no chance of survival. As they entered the courtyard, the first thing that caught their attention was the random scattering of bodies. The lieutenant signaled them to fan out and search. The demolition specialists cautiously circled the nearest hangar and found more dead men inside. Some wore cartel uniforms. Others obviously belonged to mafia groups. All bore horrific wounds as though a creature with immense strength had attacked them. One corpse was missing both arms. Another lay by an overturned table, half his torso gone. The radio man looked up at the main building's facade, noticing shattered windows and doors that appeared to have been ripped outward from inside, suggesting a furious onslaught. The machine gunner studied the tracks on the ground, noting deep ruts where cars seemed to have sped off in a panic. But the torn-off doors scattered around seemed to disprove the idea that any of this was the work of mere human hands. Approaching a body near the wheels of an SUV, the squad leader could see it belonged to a man in an expensive suit. His chest had been torn open, and his face was frozen in horror. The young sniper pointed to more corpses by a car with foreign plates. The radio man guessed these might be the mafia bosses who had come for negotiations. The demolition experts, seeing the carnage, exchanged glances. None of them had anticipated an attack so devastating that it could wipe out so many drug traffickers at once. The lieutenant told them to stay alert. There was still a chance someone might be hiding. The group headed for the entrance of the main building, passing another couple of bodies, also mutilated. Alarmingly, none appeared to have died from gunshot wounds. The injuries looked more like they had been inflicted by massive jaws, or perhaps in some kind of savage melee with a crude, brutal weapon. The machine gunner remarked that this didn't look like any routine shootout. Even without explanation, it was clear something had happened here that went far beyond known tactics. Leaving one of the demolition specialists outside to stand guard, the others went in. There were no footsteps or voices within. The musty smell mingled with the scent of blood, which sometimes grew stronger as they moved through the corridors. The young sniper swept his flashlight into dark corners. Furniture lay overturned everywhere. Doors had been kicked in, and dried blood stained the walls and floor. In a hushed tone, the radio man said he couldn't tell whether there had been a firefight or if someone had carried out a massacre without using firearms. Through the radio man, the lieutenant reported to command that the base was deserted and its occupants had been killed under strange circumstances. The response, once again, was an order. Find out where the bosses are and finish the job if any of them are still alive. Do not leave the base until you have full clarity. No one knew what to do about all these bodies. But one thing was clear. Their mission remained unchanged. The unit was here to confirm whether any of the mafia bosses had survived. So far, there was no sign of that. The eerie silence that hung over the base filled them with dread. It was as though the ground itself groaned under the weight of the bloodshed. The lieutenant glanced at his men and ordered them to check the nearest rooms to rule out the chance of a sudden attack. The young sniper's unease grew. He kept thinking about the terrified cartel fighters they'd encountered in the forest, realizing those men had a real reason to be afraid. Something, or someone, had gotten here before the special unit and carried out an all-out slaughter. Inside the building, they continued forward quietly, doing their best not to make noise. The beams of their flashlights revealed details of the devastation. Ripped-out electrical wires, shattered glass, spent shell casings scattered on the floor. One of the demolition experts moved on the left, pistol at the ready. The young sniper covered the right, occasionally pausing to listen. The lieutenant led the small column. In the main hall, where intelligence said the cartel was supposed to meet with the mafia bosses, they found a complete wreck. A massive mahogany table lay on its side in the middle of the room. Chairs were scattered all around, and guards' bodies lay everywhere. Judging by their gear and build, these were seasoned fighters who had likely seen combat before. None bore bullet wounds. Instead, many had gaping wounds at the neck or large, jagged tears across their torsos. At the sight of such brutality, the young sniper felt a lump in his throat but said nothing. The machine gunner came in behind him to ensure the room was secure. He pointed out several men lying near the table who appeared even more powerfully built than typical guards. One of them was obviously former military from another region, distinguished by recognizable tattoos, and all had died in a vicious melee. The lieutenant knelt by one particular body. It was the notorious cartel boss himself, infamous for his physical strength and cruelty. His chest had been ripped open, arms splayed out. The smell of gunpowder had almost faded, replaced by the stale reek of blood. The young sniper turned to the lieutenant, who noticed just in time that the cartel boss's head twitched. The man, who seemed dead, suddenly moved his lips. His eyes were half closed, and he let out a groan, proof that he was dying right there in front of them. The demolition expert jumped back a step, shocked that anyone could still be alive with injuries like those. The lead sniper leaned in. The man spat blood and said something in a hoarse whisper that sounded like a deranged chuckle, shot through with fear and madness. Recognizing the U.S. military uniforms, he rasped out a mocking line. "You're too late. The devil's already here. He punished me for my sins. Took everyone." His words were disjointed, but their meaning was clear. Someone had gotten here first and unleashed a killing spree. But who had that kind of power? Who could so brutally defeat the drug cartel's armed might head-on? The young sniper glanced toward the shattered doors that let in a draft. He listened carefully but heard no footsteps or other signs of life. The boss coughed, another spurt of blood trickling out, then began to laugh hoarsely before snarling. "The beast won't let anyone go, friends or foes." The lieutenant didn't bother asking more questions. The dying man wouldn't be able to provide coherent answers anyway. While the group was still scanning the rooms, the ceiling in the corridor began to creak, as though something heavy was bearing down on it. One demolition specialist spotted cracks forming along the supports. He had barely begun to warn the others when chunks of plaster and splinters of wood rained down. Right behind them fell a creature whose outline defied logical comprehension, wolf-like in shape, at least 7 feet tall, with powerful limbs. Its fur stuck out in ragged clumps, and in the flashlight beams, huge fangs flashed. It landed right between the team and the cartel boss's body, as if claiming its prey. The thing grabbed the still-breathing drug lord by the throat and lifted him off the floor with ease. The lieutenant spun, making for the nearest cover and signaling his men to spread out. The beast roared, a sound so loud it rattled their ears. The cartel boss screamed in terror. In that same moment, the creature snapped its jaws once, severing the boss's head, as though proving that no human cruelty could ever match its ferocity. The young sniper nearly dropped his rifle from shock. The radio man standing closer to the door reached for his radio in a desperate attempt to alert command. The lieutenant ordered everyone to retreat outside. The monster noticed the movement and lunged forward. Gunfire erupted almost instantly. Everyone opened fire, hoping to keep the thing at bay. Bullets tore into fur and flesh, but the beast didn't appear subdued. It let out a savage snarl, clutching the cartel boss's bloody corpse. The lieutenant shouted for them to run. The unit bolted out of the building. The machine gunner laid down covering fire while the young sniper reloaded on the move. As they burst out into the open, they spotted an SUV parked near the destroyed entrance. The demolition expert who had stayed outside was already behind the wheel, hearing the roars and gunshots. He yelled for them to jump in. The beast wasted no time. They heard a thunderous crash as the top floor wall crumbled, and the creature leaped through a massive hole, charging at them at incredible speed. The radio man stumbled on the step, falling a bit behind. The werewolf seized the opportunity. A powerful claw slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Its roar drowned out the man's cry, and the entire group realized they couldn't save him. The young sniper fired at the creature while it tore into the radio man, but to no avail. The lieutenant dragged him into the vehicle. There was no time for a rescue. The demolition expert floored the gas pedal as soon as everyone but the radio man was inside. The door slammed shut mid-flight. The SUV roared away from the base, leaving behind horrific screams and their dead comrade. Their communication gear, and the last hope of coordinating with command, remained next to the radio man's shredded remains. The SUV sped out of the courtyard, following a dirt road leading into thick forest. The machine gunner shifted so he could cover their rear. The second demolition specialist and both snipers huddled in the back, trying to steady their nerves after their encounter with that creature. None of them had ever seen anything like it, and no one could guess how it had survived the barrage, seemingly without serious injury. The lieutenant sensed there was little time for reflection. They were being hunted by something capable of wiping out an entire base. The engine roared as the vehicle jolted over ruts and potholes, trees blurring by on either side. With each passing second, they got farther from that cursed place. The demolition expert kept the accelerator floored, struggling to avoid slamming into a trunk. The steering wheel shook in his hands and the road twisted wildly. In the back, there seemed to be strange sounds getting closer. The machine gunner sat next to the driver, weapon clutched to his chest, eyes fixed on the rear window. Suddenly, a huge shadow flickered among the trees, moving at terrifying speed. The young sniper yelled that there was a slope coming up, and the vehicle might tip dangerously when they turned. Just then, something crashed into the side door with a deafening impact. Metal buckled, glass shattered, and shards flew everywhere. A rush of cold air flooded the cabin. Clumps of dark fur caught the headlights' glare. The monster was right there, slamming into the SUV with force akin to a battering ram. The vehicle lost control, swerving and rolling over. It happened in a heartbeat. Everyone felt themselves slam up against the roof, metal shards and shattered glass raining down. They rolled downhill, flipping multiple times before coming to a grinding halt at the bottom. Pain tore through each member of the group. The young sniper's shoulder was wrenched out of place, having slammed against a seat. The lieutenant suffered a brutal blow to his chest, making breathing agonizing. The machine gunner was wedged between seats, letting out ragged moans. The demolition experts were also injured, one barely conscious, the other checking to see if his partner was still alive. A terrible roar echoed from outside. The werewolf was still there. It began clawing at the metal, trying to tear its way in. The tires were still spinning in vain, and they could hear the drip of leaking fuel. The lieutenant tried to lift his rifle, but his arm was seized by a cramp from the impact. Summoning all his resolve, the machine gunner freed himself from the crushed seats. He raised the barrel of his machine gun and squeezed the trigger. The rounds ricocheted inside the cabin, but some bullets tore a gap in the frame, hitting the beast. It howled, shifting to a shrill, furious wail. The SUV suddenly pitched sideways again, sliding further down. The beast was pinned beneath the twisted metal, and they heard bones crack. It let out a howl. Whether of pain or rage, it was hard to tell. The creature thrashed, trying to escape. One demolition specialist, still alert, took a gamble. He pulled a small charge from his bag and tried to shove it through the gap where the monster's paw was lodged. But the lead sniper stopped him, understanding that the detonation could kill them all since the creature was pressed tight against the vehicle. The machine gunner continued firing, hoping it would at least wound the thing enough to slow it down. Then abruptly, the SUV's weight fully shifted, crashing onto its side and crushing the beast. They heard a sickening crunch of its spine, followed by a piercing shriek, and then silence. The group assumed the creature must be dead. But only a few seconds later, another roar broke through. Somehow the thing had managed to pull free, leaving a dark puddle behind. Its fur was matted, and its limbs moved clumsily. Wheezing, it dragged itself deeper into the forest's shadows, blood dripping from multiple wounds. It seemed forced to retreat, at least briefly, to lick its wounds. Finally, the survivors managed to crawl out of the overturned vehicle. The demolition expert who'd been driving never regained consciousness, apparently killed instantly by the initial impact. The second demolition specialist helped the young sniper free his arm. The lieutenant, barely able to stand, realized how vulnerable they were. No communications, no functioning transport, and while the beast was injured, it would surely come back. Those who remained, the lieutenant, the machine gunner, the young sniper, and the surviving demolition expert, checked their gear. Most of the ammunition had been damaged in the crash, and the mini-drone cases were bent out of shape. The demolition expert pulled out the drones that still worked, but admitted they had very few left. The machine gunner, nursing a back injury, could still walk by leaning on his rifle, but real combat was becoming difficult for him. The team leader quickly assessed everyone's condition and decided they had to keep moving while the creature was off licking its wounds. They left the smoking SUV behind and hurried into the dense undergrowth, following the river. They hoped the current might lead them closer to the evacuation point. The young sniper carried the one rifle still in decent shape, scanning the surroundings in fear of another surprise attack. The demolition expert moved almost soundlessly, clutching the bag of remaining charges. The lieutenant paused every so often to listen. The machine gunner, muttering curses through the pain, struggled to keep up. After a while, they heard the crash of water and emerged by a waterfall. The river plunged about 30 feet onto rocks below, sending up a misty spray. At first glance, it looked like a good place to hide. The cliffs shielded them from open view, and dense foliage offered a chance to stay concealed. The group stopped beneath some overhanging branches to catch their breath. The young sniper unrolled a makeshift medical kit, trying to treat the machine gunner's wounds and bandage the lieutenant's bruises. Meanwhile, the demolition expert checked on the remaining drones, but their reprieve was brief. From behind them came a deep, guttural roar, filled with hatred. The beast was back on their trail. The machine gunner tried to raise his weapon, but pain in his shoulder kept him from firing accurately. The lieutenant ordered everyone to spread out among the rocks. The werewolf emerged from behind the tree trunks, limping and dripping blood. Its matted fur glistened with gore, a dark patch staining its side, but it pressed forward like a wounded predator prepared to fight to the death. The young sniper fired first, hoping to scare the creature off, or at least slow its charge. The bullet seemed to find flesh, and the beast let out a short snarl before darting aside, disappearing behind some boulders. The demolition expert proposed luring it closer to the waterfall's edge, where he could toss in a handheld explosive. The machine gunner, despite his injury, agreed to provide cover. The team started moving along the rocks, attempting to draw the creature toward the water. Suddenly, it attacked from the flank, slamming into the machine gunner. Fangs and claws tore into his protective vest, ripping the fabric. He dropped his weapon, screaming in pain, but managed to kick the beast, trying to push it away. The scuffle lasted only a few seconds before the young sniper fired a burst into the creature's back, forcing it to let go. The monster recoiled, then lunged again. This time both it and the machine gunner ended up at the very edge of the waterfall. The wet, algae-covered rocks were slippery. With another vicious slash, the beast made the machine gunner lose his footing. In a split second, both vanished over the side, swallowed by the churning water below. All the others could do was watch as the dark shape of the creature and the figure of their comrade tumbled into the cascade, disappearing in the foaming spray. The lieutenant, the young sniper, and the demolition expert stood there, reeling from the loss. The machine gunner had likely saved them, distracting the beast and taking it with him, but they had no idea if he'd survived. It seemed all but impossible, considering the brutal impact against the rocks and the raging current. The young sniper froze, stunned that everything had happened in the blink of an eye. The lieutenant wiped sweat from his brow, fully aware that the monster might even survive a waterfall plunge, given its inhuman resilience. The demolition expert, breathing hard, suggested using the mini-drones to set a trap while they still had some room to maneuver. The three survivors picked out a clearing near a bend in the river, hidden among dead trees and rocky outcrops. The demolition expert got to work examining the drones that were still functional. Only a few could fly. He opened the mini cases of explosives to check if the power regulators were working. Fortunately, these models were reliable enough. According to the demolition expert, he could adjust the blast radius. The lieutenant pointed to several boulders that provided good cover. The young sniper agreed to take up position on the left side of the clearing, covering that sector of fire. The lead sniper planned to lie low on the right, closer to the tree trunks. The demolition specialist set up in the center, holding the drone control panel. He calibrated the explosive charge so that it could deal serious damage to the monster without blasting his teammates off the face of the earth. Time passed, and still the werewolf did not appear. The young sniper kept glancing over his shoulder, worried that the creature might strike without warning. The lieutenant, exhausted and wounded, rested on one knee, thinking about how they might retreat if the trap only partially succeeded. Meanwhile, the demolition specialist placed several tripwires at the approaches to the clearing, hoping they would at least give a warning. He ignored the pain in his back and tried to work carefully. About an hour of agonizing silence went by. Then came the sharp crack of breaking branches. That familiar roar echoed beyond the wall of foliage, snapping everyone to full alert. The lieutenant slowly aimed his rifle toward the source of the sound. A minute of complete stillness passed, and then the creature emerged from the darkness. It was dragging one of its hind legs, and blood glistened along its flank. Its fur was matted, and its muzzle caked with clotted blood. This werewolf no longer looked like the invincible giant that had appeared in the cartel building, but it still radiated deadly menace. The lieutenant fired first, hoping to draw the beast's attention and force it out onto the clearing where the traps were set. Bullets tore into its flesh, and the monster howled, lunging forward. The young sniper unleashed a short burst, trying to herd the creature toward the center of the ambush site. Right. When it reached the middle of the clearing, the demolition specialist triggered one of the planted charges. A deafening blast rang out, hurling the beast against a tree. The plan worked, at least partially. The creature was still moving, hissing in pain. The demolition specialist readied the drones while the lieutenant and the young sniper continued firing, keeping the monster in the kill zone where additional explosives would be most effective. The werewolf flailed about, its movements lacking their former power. Each round of ammunition and every burst of explosive force seemed to gradually sap its strength. You could see unbridled fury in the creature's eyes, but its body was clearly reaching its limit. The demolition specialist launched the first drone, a small device resembling a toy helicopter, loaded with a lethal charge. The lieutenant kept firing and shouted to the young sniper not to get too close. The beast, staggering, tried to evade the drone, but it was agile enough to stay on target. After a few tense seconds, the demolition specialist activated the charge. The explosion shook the air, sending shards of debris and soil skyward. When the smoke cleared, the werewolf lay on its side, missing a front paw. Its left leg was mangled and burns covered its body. The young sniper thought the monster surely couldn't stand now. But the werewolf suddenly jerked and tried to drag itself toward the undergrowth. The lieutenant took aim and fired, but the shot hit the dirt nearby. Immediately, the demolition specialist said it was time for the second drone to finish the job. He launched it, yet at that moment, the beast sprang forward, despite its horrific injuries. It lunged straight for the demolition specialist's hiding spot. A panicked scream rang out. The demolition specialist couldn't dodge in time. The creature's claws ripped into his chest, shredding his armor plates, pinning him to the ground. Blood gushed across the grass. Even as he gasped for air, the demolition specialist managed to reach the drone controller and press the activation switch for the second drone, which was close by. The blast was terrifying. The werewolf was thrown backward and part of its torso was blown apart. The demolition specialist died instantly, reduced to a bloody silhouette. Though they were behind boulders, the lieutenant and the young sniper were knocked down by the shock wave. The creature collapsed, now just a mutilated mass. It seemed impossible that anything could survive such wounds. Yet it still drew breath, issuing rasping growls. The young sniper was the first to notice the monster, missing several limbs, still creeping forward. The lieutenant, grievously hurt, sat propped against a tree. He checked his magazine and realized only a few bullets remained. The young sniper rushed to help, but the lieutenant ordered him to fall back several yards and keep a safe distance. At this, the werewolf hissed, and its fur began to swell and blister. The singed hide peeled away in charred clumps, revealing human skin beneath. burned and shredded by shrapnel. A pistol round from the lieutenant hit the creature in the head, but it only twitched and kept crawling. The young sniper hesitated, unwilling to abandon the lead sniper in such peril. Even with part of its face shredded by flying debris, the monster wouldn't quit. Gritting his teeth, the lieutenant again commanded the young sniper to leave. For a second, the young sniper did step back. The lieutenant fired shot after shot, punching through the beast's cheek and body. The werewolf slowed, but still did not die. Then the young sniper realized the monster was reverting to a human form. The fur was vanishing, the claws and fangs retracting, until a man lay there, missing an arm and a leg, horribly wounded by explosives. He dragged himself toward the lieutenant, scrabbling at the ground in a desperate crawl. The lieutenant, weary and injured, raised his rifle, using the last of his ammo. Each shot tore through human flesh now. Every bullet triggered spasms and bloody splashes, yet the half-human monster refused to stop. At last it reached the lieutenant, grabbing him by the throat with its one remaining hand. The face of the wounded man-beast was twisted in agony and rage, his skin cracked and ravaged by burns. He spat out curses in Spanish. "I'll kill you all. You took everything from me, my family, my life. Damn bandits, damn cartel. Why did you kill my daughter? Why? I won't forgive you." The lead sniper, choking on his own pain and wounds, looked into the man's eyes and said, "We're not the cartel, you idiot. I'm a U.S. soldier." The werewolf paused weakly, as if not comprehending what he'd just heard. A flicker of confusion appeared in his eyes, but before he could react, a shot rang out. The young sniper, who had crept closer again, squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the monster square in the forehead. The body shuddered. The grip on the lieutenant's throat slackened, and the head slumped. For several moments nobody moved. The lieutenant, gasping for air, slowly freed himself from the dead werewolf's hand. The young sniper lowered his weapon, feeling his hands tremble. Propping himself up on an elbow, the lieutenant surveyed what remained of the creature, now looking more like a mutilated man than a beast. All around lay evidence of a battlefield. Wreckage of drones, the demolition specialist's corpse, and blood soaking into the earth. The river rumbled in the distance, and the forest stood silent, bearing witness to this grim confrontation. Only the two of them remained alive. Closing his eyes briefly, the lieutenant took a few ragged breaths and told the young sniper to check the area for any further threats. The sniper searched, but found no signs of life. It was clear their mission was over. The heads of the drug cartel and the mafia were dead, though not by the special unit's hands. A monster, driven by some personal motive for vengeance and gifted with inhuman power, had effectively carried out the job of eliminating the criminal leadership. The survivors' wounds required medical attention. They were cut off from communication, and the helicopter might still be waiting at the designated spot, if it hadn't already left, assuming they were all dead. The lieutenant suggested trying to reach the evacuation point, using the river as a guide. The young sniper helped him to his feet, and they started away from the scene of their final battle. Every step was painful, but staying there meant certain death. They had almost no medical supplies left and no food at all. After a few hundred yards, they stopped to rest. The lieutenant and his companion glanced back toward the disfigured corpse of the werewolf man who could no longer move or heal. No prayers were spoken. No one mourned his fate. Both men understood that this encounter had cost their team's lives and revealed the existence of something that defied the usual notions of war and weaponry. They pressed on, one grueling step at a time, hoping that rescue might still await them at the pickup point. No orders from command mattered anymore. Survival was all they cared about now. The young sniper's entire body throbbed with pain, but he continued supporting the lieutenant. Moments later, both vanished into the thick undergrowth. Behind them lay a bloody battleground where the remains of the former werewolf sprawled, recognizable to no one. Perhaps he had been a victim of cartel violence, driven by vengeance. In the end, the outcome was equally tragic for everyone involved.